other Inuit testimony is really second or third hand, usually deriving from the tourist story, but sometimes adding cogent detail. They talk about the location of the wreck in relation to their named points, which are sometimes not easily identifiable. There are a few crude native maps, crude in that they didn't have a Cartesian navigation system like we do, so they're quite difficult to decipher. All of the traditions point to this general area called Aglooka as the place where the ship came. Unfortunately, it's a long peninsula and a bay covered with islands, so it's not enough detail. But most of the stories about how the ship was found, the condition it was in, the men that were on it are all very consistent.
And they point to?
All the stories point to one of two areas, and we've now searched one and are in the second one. Either near Kirkwall Island in the north or near O'Reilly Island in the south.
In terms of why aren't we searching, from a boat, and which would be more comfortable and warmer, and all of those things? It would be, and then you could dive down if you actually thought you might find something. Why aren't we searching from a boat?
We initially tried to search from boats. We searched for 2 years from small survey craft, and one of the main reasons was the shortness of the season. You have about 3 weeks when the water is completely ice-free. The other one is the ever-present wind. It's very difficult to maintain accurate plot lines in a small 30-foot boat. And so I came up with the idea after another snowmobile trip that perhaps this would be an easier way to get accurate lines. And last year we proved the method was 8 times as efficient.
And is there any other Inuit testimony where we can go into the James Ross and their memory of things going back a long way, maybe?
Sure.
Okay, I mean, Dave, you're basing a huge amount of work, effort, and money on Inuit testimony. So, but how reliable is Inuit testimony?
I started off, like most researchers into Franklin, discounting most Inuit testimony, and it's certainly not straightforward. There are translation problems, there are elements of fantasy and superstition thrown in, but over many years of reading it, I became very convinced that the core of most Inuit testimony is very trustworthy. They remember names, places, people, and events very well. You have to remember that to them, the Franklin expedition was akin to aliens landing on Earth. It was one of the most significant things for the generation. And everyone had a story. Everyone remembered the stories for generations and passed them on in the igloos at night. And though they got garbled over time, they did not get unintelligible over time. And whenever we can link them up to the physical evidence so far, I believe they've proven very reliable. So I'm quite convinced that Mutorik's story is reliable and that we're in the right area.
That is the story about the sinking of the ship, but did they remember other things about the Franklin expedition from earlier, or even other expeditions?
They remembered an amazing amount of detail about the Franklin expedition. They
Just
knew,
the Inuit did.
Okay. The Inuit remembered traditions. They remembered...
Started in your own time. And always, you have plenty of time. You can take in your own time. So, did they remember other things?
The Inuit remembered almost everything about the Franklin expedition. They remembered that Crozier had sailed with Perry in 1821 when he was a young man, and that his native name at the time was Aglooka, and they called him Aglooka again. They remembered that some of the men marching along the shore smoked pipes and had gaps in their teeth that the pipes fit in. They remembered that the body found at Pfeffer River had a big jaw, and it ended up being identified by the jaw as the body of Aglooka Cone. They remembered the weather and how many people were in the party and the names of all the people, all the native people who met the white men when they were on the march. They have some interesting stories. They couldn't understand where the women were. They thought that the white men must either have women locked in the bottom of the ship or a race of dwarves who did all the work, because somebody had to be doing the work. Of course, in Inuit culture, that would be the women. They had them using stories. There's an indication in one story that they came across the Franklin crew during Guy Fawkes night, and they were all painted black and dancing around. There's a very amusing story the Inuit tell. You had no idea what was going on about that. One was offered some pork rib and thought it might be a human rib. He knew it was not the rib of any animal he'd ever seen, and he refused to eat it. The details, they remember a boat that you carried on your shoulder and filled up with wind, and that was only a few years after inflatable boats had been invented, and one of the first inflatable boats ever to be used was the Franklin expedition. So it's that eye for detail, which is a survival skill here, which makes their story so amazing.
In terms, like the Franklin people would regard them as muck savages and so on. I mean, given the fact you spend a lot of time up here, how do you feel about their ability to survive compared to, say, the Franklin people?
There's no doubt that the Inuit considered the Franklin people to be children in their own environment, in this environment. Just like children, they knew nothing about how to survive and had to be cared for. The Inuit themselves, of course, had generations and centuries of learning how to live. We found even in our own expedition that Saul is invaluable. His knowledge of the weather patterns, his ability to fashion anything out of anything, prepare everything in sight. Forbearance and good humor and his resistance to cold were all superior to ours. There's no doubt that the Inuit, when they encountered a large party of white men marching, knew that these men were doomed. And the stories are quite clear that they abandoned a party of about 40 men, 4 hunters abandoned them, knowing that there was no way they could help them.
Yeah, that's a question I want to ask you. Why didn't the Inuit help these white men who were helpless, who were dying? And the white men were pretty friendly towards them. Why didn't they help them just right at the end of your nose there? Why? Surely it shows badly on the Inuit that they didn't actually save a lot of the white men and a lot of Franklin's men.
The white men that were encountered on the march by the Inuit were probably as numerous as all of the Inuit living within hundreds of square miles of us. The Inuit didn't tend to travel in large bands. A party of 4 hunters and their wives and children would be pretty representative. So to be saddled with 40 or 50 uninvited guests and try to support them, the cold calculus was that you would all die. And I think that it was pretty obvious to the Inuit that these men couldn't care for themselves and that they were doomed anyway. They were very unsentimental about death. In this environment, the weak were often left behind in an igloo for the benefit of those who could survive. So they really did not feel any compunction to save Franklin's men. There was no inducement that Franklin's men could give them in their wealth that would make them risk their own families. And they probably could not have done so anyway.
And is there any sense that the Franklin men began to adapt and learn?
There are some stories of the last few Franklin survivors who made it to an Inuit encampment. 4 men, one of whom died during the winter of a sickness, but the other 3 left. And the stories told by the Inuit indicate that they could not believe that those men didn't make it home, because by that time they had learned the skills necessary. They wore the proper clothing, they learned how to hunt, and they were very hardy men. So the Inuit always insisted that those 3 men must have made it home.
And do we know anything about their fate?
They just walk off into the mists. There's one very faint story of some white men being killed by Indians through their tent, shot through their tent from their rifles, which may or may not be true or may not relate to those men.
Very good. Okay, Dave, so what's the next stage in the plan? Okay, this is, when we finish up here, what's the next stage in the plan? Where do we go from here?
Well, we return from here in about a week with masses of data, which we'll send off for analysis. About a month after that, we'll determine whether there are any targets that look promising enough to justify a higher resolution search. If there are very promising targets, the plan is to come back with side-scan sonar and underwater cameras and divers and check out the top 5 targets. But they'll have to be showing ideal magnetic characteristics for us to make that investment.
Well, I just want to do a piece that's a bit of exciting information coming from Souls. That's the sort of thing I want.
Okay.
Has our Inuit guide here turned up anything interesting information to do with Franklin or anything like that?
Saul has been very communicative about things that have been found. Recently, 7 years ago actually, some hunters on the mainland found a large stick with a broken off at one end and metal at the other end, which he believes might be the mast of a ship. It's about 7 to 10 miles away from here. We went looking for it a few days ago, but it's still under the snow as far as we can tell.
Is it significant? Could it be just a piece from anything?
Well, it could be the mast of any kind of ship, but it would be significant if it had fittings on it with the broad arrow of the Royal Navy, and even so, it wouldn't be definitive, because the drift pattern of all debris is down into this corner of this bay, but it would certainly lend credence to the fact that it was.
Okay, Dave, what do you think? At the end of the day, what are our chances of finding? We're going to find this wreck?
I think that the chances are probably less than 50-50 that we'll find this wreck. I think that the odds are stacked against us. It's a big ocean. The clues are very vague. We're not even absolutely sure that the method is right, but I think it would be more of a shame not to try. So we'll give it a shot.
Why are we spending so much time and effort if the odds are so small?
As I say, if you go through life and all you count are the results, then you're going to be disappointed. I go through life and try and count the experience. I still like this experience. I like the experience that I'm up here looking for something that's significant.
What does it do for you personally, all of this searching and finding and so on?
Well, besides all the interesting people that I get to meet, I think probably the main payoff to me is definitely an ego boost or a self-image boost. Without this, I'm just another 46-year-old father of two driving my kids to swimming lessons. And see, people never ask me about that part of my life. It always seems to be the Arctic world. Interesting.
And how far back does this, treat these as being asked for the first time, how far back does this interest go? When was the first sort of time you can remember having your sort of imagination tweaked by this sort of thing?
Just Franklin?
Well, just boyhood sort of. I mean, this is real boyhood sort of adventure stuff.
Sure.
I mean, some people might say you haven't grown up.
Well, I definitely haven't grown up. This is a product of a bunch of intertwining elements of my boyhood. The love of Homer and oral history, which eventually turned into Inuit history and a bias towards it. Love of boy adventure and explorer stories from Mungo Park to James Cook.
That's good. Just off there. Okay, so take that up again. Hold on a sec. So Dave, like, is this not? Should you not grow up? I mean, is this not just boyhood stuff gone mad?
I sometimes think that I should grow up, and that this is just a twining of a bunch of elements that went into my boyhood. I always loved adventure stories from Mungo Park and Stanley Livingston to Captain Cook in Vancouver. I always thought that I was born a century too late. I wanted to be a chart maker. I ended up being a navigator in my professional life. I loved Homer and oral histories, and I think that probably gave me a bit of a bias towards the Inuit history, oral history, when I encountered that. I love the fact that this area had never been charted, and that there are now some field sheets that have my name on there as assistant surveyor. It does let me feel like I was a century ago. There's a bit of romanticism in all of the people on this team. I think that you would definitely need to put up with some of the conditions that they put up with.
What are the conditions like at the moment? Or what are the most severe of the conditions we've felt on this trip?
Well, all the conditions today are quite nice, but about 2 weeks ago we had a blizzard pass through, a 1.5 day blizzard.
It's okay, we're going to do that, just don't have any shells. So,
conditions.
Is there anything else in terms of your own sort of spark in your imagination and so on? Have you done anything that has ever given you a sort of a sense of the men and the people that passed through this place?
Well, one of the turning points in my own research into Franklin was when I was on exchange in England, and I went to the Maritime Museum, and I could actually hold the cans and see the Victory Point record, and read the letters and the notebooks that had been found off the beach. And that's when I started changing my focus from being a diver looking for a ship to being interested in people. I was about the same age. I had some of the same attitudes. I became interested in men themselves, and I became more finely tuned to the story. And I think that definitely sustained me through definitely the writing of the book and the last decade up here.
Spending time up here, do you feel sorry for them?
It's hard not to feel sorry for them, but they were doing what they... start that again. I've done this before, I shouldn't be able to do it. You have to feel sorry for them, but they were just doing what they were paid for, really. They were, most of them, Arctic and Antarctic veterans. Until the Franklin expedition occurred, it was not very hazardous work, statistically. It was much more likely that you would die of fever in the West Indies, a trip to Jamaica, than you would on a trip to the Arctic. I've sailed with sailors all my life, and it's been a pretty easy posting. Most of the winter you're going to spend in the ship not working. You got extra food, you got extra clothing, you got extra pay, and I'm sure that a lot of them considered it to be a plum assignment until things went sideways. Once that things did go wrong, they were up against amazing privations, of course, and it's difficult not to feel sorry for them when they're suffering.
So this was something of a catastrophe.
This was the worst catastrophe in Arctic exploration. The loss of 129 men doesn't seem too great in the face of some of the disasters that have been following since. But it was amazingly important, and it changed the whole methodology for exploring the Arctic from large shipboard parties into small surveying parties based on shore.
So that it was viewed as such in Britain as being a major disaster. Just dwell a little on that.
Before Franklin disaster, things had gone fairly well before the Franklin disaster. Before the Franklin disaster, things had gone fairly well for large shipboard parties in the Arctic, and it definitely changed the attitude of the Admiralty in this